Hello there, my name is Dr. Saleem Javed. I'm an associate professor at the Department of Journalism and Mass Communication, and we have been talking about French cinema, the rise of French cinema, and how it has affected the world cinema per se. Now, if you remember when we were talking about that from in the beginning of the last century, towards the beginning of the last century and up till the initiation of First World War, the French cinema was predominantly influenced by Georges Méliès. We have talked about at length, we have talked at length about Georges Méliès in our early videos, and A Trip to the Moon is one of the films that everybody talks about even today also. Now, when you say that in the beginning of the last century, the French cinema was predominantly influenced by Georges Méliès, this indicates the trick photography was at its peak, and whosoever was making film started including trick photography as part of the filmmaking. Such was the influence of Georges Méliès, and it ran up to the beginning or up till the end of First World War. Nonetheless, Méliès's commercial impact was fading out, by the end of the first decade of the last century, and new names like Charles Pathé, Gaumont, they started surfacing. So, just to recapitulate everything, and then we will be talking about Pathé at length and Gaumont at length during the lecture. Now, as you can see on your screen, Pathé Frères established an extensive production facility in Vincennes in 1901 and subsequently emerged as the largest maker of film equipment and raw film stock in Europe. This is something remarkable about Pathé Frères. Now, if you see on your screen, it says Pathé Frères. I told you that this is a French name and the pronunciation is Pathé Frères. Now, Pathé, as he started growing as one of the largest maker of the film equipment and raw film stock in Europe, and this is happening. The time frame that I'm talking about is basically it's basically the uh, prior of starting of the First World War. So you understand everything that the influence of French cinema was before the First World War and up till the end of First World War, because Gaumont was there. Now, subsequential financial resources enabled Pathé to expand dominance over distribution network and cinema theaters across continent. We have talked about it. This is a recapitulation that I am talking about. And in 1908, Pathé distributed twice as many pictures in the United States as the American production companies combined. Now, this information is something which is something seriously to think about. It requires your attention that such was the influence of French film industry, that it was able to produce, distribute twice as many pictures in the United States as all American production companies combined. Now, such, look at the grandeur that I am talking about. And then again, we talked about that Pathé, the profit ratio was from 5,000 to 10,000%, and subsequently he acquired Star Film Company in 1908. If you remember, the Star Film Company was started by Georges Méliès, which he acquired in 1908 and established itself as a Méliès distributor for several tumultuous years until 1913. 1914, the First World War started. Now, we also talked about Ferdinand Zika, who was Director General of Pathé. Ferdinand Zika was the Director General of Pathé, a former music hall singer whose astute understanding of audience preferences significantly contributed to his employer's substantial financial success. Now, this is something, this astute understanding, of audience preferences. It is a trait which, if I may say so, almost negligible people, they hold this astute understanding. What it says actually, that the nerve of people, what do they want, So Ferdinand Zika, who was Director General of Pathé, who was actually a former music hall singer, had this bone, and he was able to understand, he was able to comprehend, he was able to anticipate, what people want. Now, this makes Ferdinand Zika the Ferdinand Zika. Now, similarly to Méliès, Zika focused on narrative films. Now, what differs Ferdinand Zika from George Méliès? This is really interesting. As I said, that everybody was influenced by George Méliès, so for even Ferdinand Zika is not an exception. But what Ferdinand Zika does makes the difference. At that point of time, when I was talking about George Méliès during my lectures, if you remember, I talked about tableau mentality. You know, so this tableau mentality is something which if I say, if it was a sting, so everybody was everybody was under this magical spell called trick photography. Ferdinand Zika also started doing that, but what he did actually makes the difference, that he was not limited to George Méliès' style only. He was shooting outdoor, and he was occasionally rotating his camera to track the action. So he was doing substantially different than George Méliès. And then, as you can see on your screen, it says that additionally drawing inspiration from the chase films of England's Brighton School. Now, Brighton School is something that I will talk separately about Brighton School, and I'll pick it up separately. But this Brighton School, this is something which is very sometime becomes a criticism of England cinema also, that when they had Brighton School, which is as early as any other development filmmaking nation, as early as any filmmaking nation, but even after having Brighton School, England was not that progressive, in making films in the beginning of the history of cinema. Now, Zika understood, Zika, even George Méliès read about Brighton School. So, Zika created a distinctive Gallic version. It is, as you can see on your screen, it's called Gallic version, known as course comique. Now, this comic chase or course comic, which integrated parallel action editing with trick cinematography, reminiscent of Méliès, to elicit amusement rather than surprise. Now, this is we need to ponder upon, because one, by using the same understanding, is creating suspense, George Méliès, and Ferdinand Zika, by using the same sensibility, is creating amusement. So it was not all fantasy, which was the track, George Méliès track, magic, fantasy, trick photography. So though he was there, he was also influenced, he was also following the same pattern, but somehow he was leaving, Ferdinand Zika was leaving his own mark. And if on the one hand there was suspense, on the other hand through Zika there was amusement also. And interestingly, he was able to come up with something very interesting called Gallic version, known as the course comique or comic chase. Now, one of my friends was just talking about Sholay, and there is a very interesting character कि हम अंग्रेज़ों के ज़माने के jailer हैं. So that you know that a police officer is in a comic character. You know, the birth is here in when you talk about course comique. So even Sholay used this technique called course comique or comic chase for that matter. So it is here where you see the birth of this style. Now, this is something which is happening for the first time in the history of filmmaking, that you are actually making fun of police officers, or you know, your police team is full of clowns, you know, or full of stock characters, you know. So this is something. Now, look at the screen and it says Dix Farm Purla Mari, 10 wives for one husband, Lacour pursuit a la Parik, the pursuit of the wig, and La Course au Tony, which means the pursuit of the beer barrel, all from 1905, were predominantly filmed on the street of Paris and exhibited a vibrancy and creativity that captivated the young Mark Sennett, among others, who regarded themselves as the prototype of his own Keystone Cops. Now, this is something very interesting. Today, we casually call police people, police force, cops. Some serious police officers, they feel offended when you call them super cop or cop. They are police officers. So this casual word cops, COPS, and it is Keystone Cops, KOPS, you know. So the actual word is Keystone Cops, COPS, but in cinema it is called KOPS, KOPS, Cops. So don't worry about SASB, KKK, that thing. Even Hollywood had the same infected system. So from COPS they also had KOPS. So Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gham, don't worry about all that. So this K thing has been going on in Hollywood also. Very few people know. So COPS, from COPS to KOPS. Now look at these photographs on your screen. Now this is part of this course comic or comic chase, you know, where police officers are made fun of. Look at these, I mean, interesting cartoonish, or stock characters on your screen. Then you can understand when I talk about course comic what I am talking about, and how they are called Keystone Cops, and interestingly, all the films that I talked about, like in English, 10 Wives of One Husband, or The Pursuit of the Wig, or The Pursuit of the Beer Barrel, all these things. And look at these pictures that I am talking about, these pictures, and then you will understand what I am talking about. And it is basically this is basically Mark Sonnet realized that this is a style which can be worked upon. Look at these images again. This is pure beauty, and how slapsticks comedy, and all the comic shows that we know from Hollywood, especially Tom and Jerry, Laurie and Harden, I Dream of Jeannie in 1950s, Charlie Chaplin's comedy. Charlie Chaplin, I'll talk about Charlie Chaplin, and how the style of Charlie Chaplin, this particular, not exactly this, but later the developments, helped Charlie Chaplin to discover his own style. Now, Zika stayed with Pathé until its dissolution in 1939, but never progressed beyond being an excellent synthesizer of others' discoveries. Now, this is something, one must think about. I strongly put my point in the previous lecture that why George Méliès is George Méliès. Even Ferdinand Zika was far more successful than George Méliès, and but still you talk about George Méliès, and why you talk about George Méliès. Now, similar to his German equivalent Oscar Master, he is mostly recognized as a genuine primitive who enhanced and diversified the material of nation's film while striving towards the overall refinement of the medium, although without making any distinctive personal contribution. Now, this is something very, very interesting. So, so far we have talked about Georges Méliès, what he did, how Pathé started, how Pathé became strong, how Ferdinand Zika was part of Pathé, how Pathé was able to take over Star Pictures, what makes Ferdinand Zika, why he is so important, and what he is remembered as today. Now, another important person who is associated with Pathé, which is called Pathé's prodigy, is called Max Linder. Now, now this guy is really, really important. You really have to understand Max Linder is all the good television serials that you see today. If ever there is a decent book on television, big serials, and especially coming from America, then Max Linder must be one of the pioneers. I'll tell you why I'm saying it. Obviously, there was no television by the time that I'm talking about, but his style was such that I mean, one of my favorite television serials is Sherlock Holmes, the recent Sherlock Holmes made by BBC. So, when I saw Sherlock Holmes and when I saw the films made by Max Linder, then you will realize, when you compare, then you realize that Max Linder is definitely one of the pioneers, or rather the most important pioneers. So, Max Linder, another Pathé prodigy, gained international acclaim for his nuanced portrayal of a sophisticated yet helpless young man about town in pre-war Paris. Now, Linder authored and directed the majority of his 400 films and significantly impacted Charlie Chaplin's work in the subsequent decade. Now, this is how I said that I'll be talking about Charlie Chaplin. So, if you really want to understand how Charlie Chaplin got, or how Charlie Chaplin became Charlie Chaplin, so I would say that before you start seeing Charlie Chaplin as a reference, you must see the work of Max Linder, who was associated with Pathé, and he is also famously called as the Pathé prodigy. Now, why Charlie Chaplin was able to, or why Charlie Chaplin, when I talk about Max Linder, why Charlie Chaplin is remembered, and why we talk about Charlie Chaplin and Max Linder is remembered. A very interesting thing that what Max Linder created, a very nuanced portrayal of his very sophisticated yet helpless young man about town in pre-war Paris. Now, this is something very interesting, young man about town in pre-war Paris. So, he is somebody who belongs to a city, and when I'm talking about this character which Max Linder created, have Charlie Chaplin in mind and look and try to observe what I'm saying. A young man who is in a metropolitan, or who is in a big city, who is sophisticated in his own sense, but or yet helpless, and is a man about town in pre-war Paris. So, and now when I talk about Charlie Chaplin, he is a vagabond in a city with a good heart, which later on even Raj Kapoor picked in India, and from Avara to Mera Naam Joker, he actually had this very sophisticated yet helpless young man about town. You know, so look at, very interesting thing when I talk about in my classes. The very important thing I talk about, that when you know the references, you know, then sometime the references helps you create a new character. So the majority of my classes is the point that I bring in my classes is basically watch as much as you can, because that becomes a part of reading. So had I been in a literature class, I would have said read, but as I am uh, yet to be professor of communication, I always say watch as much as you can. you know so watching is reading for us. So more you watch, more you understand, there is a possibility that you will be creating something which has a possibility of being something new in itself. So I'm talking about Max Linder at this point of time. We are talking about Charlie Chaplin. From Charlie Chaplin, I'm coming to Raj Kapoor, and then you have all those characters who are sophisticated yet helpless in Indian cinema. So when you have those sort of characters in front of your eyes, then you realize, okay, this started long back. How early it started? It started as early as the beginning of cinema. So Max Linder, this is how he becomes important. And when you talk about Max Linder, you talk about Charlie Chaplin, and when you talk about Charlie Chaplin, you talk about Max Linder. So when I started watching films, when I was in my graduation and post graduation, then when I saw Charlie Chaplin for the first time, I was mesmerized by Charlie Chaplin, and I read a lot about Charlie Chaplin, and I almost watched all of his films, and then Dictator, The Kid. Oh, those are my favorite films. But when I started watching Max Linder, the work of Max Linder, then I realized, ah, okay, this is how it started. Okay, it is Charlie Chaplin is a projection of this work. It does not diminish the value of Charlie Chaplin in my eyes. Who am I? I mean, the entire world praises him. I mean, that man has done wonders. But when you know the context, then you realize, oh, aha, that aha moment. Okay, so it is from here. Okay, so if I get something, very interesting, and I know the history of it, there is a possibility that I can create, something new in the world of cinema. Now, it is noteworthy that in 1910, Pathé launched the inaugural regular newsreel. Now, please understand the time that I am talking about, 1910, there is no television at this point of time. There is no news program per se. There is no news channel. Television has not yet been invented. So by the time 1910, news reels were the source of information, which is basically non-fiction. Yes, which is basically non-fiction work of art. And the inaugural regular newsreel, the Pathé Gazette, which garnered an international weekly audience in the year preceding the war. So up till the beginning of the First World War, you have another masterstroke of Pathé is Pathé Gazette, which is like a newsreel program, and people used to watch it. So that was a great source of news. What is happening in other continents? what is happening in other countries, what is happening across the globe. So all those things through newsreels, people started seeing different world altogether when it comes to newsreels. First World War newsreels, obviously the entire country, be it any country in the world, they were able to know about the condition of First World War, who is winning, who is losing, through newsreels. I mean, reading, obviously newspaper was there, reading about it, obviously you need to be literate, but to watch newsreels, I mean, that's the beauty of television also, and the OTT platforms or the YouTube, that you don't need to be literate. To read a newspaper, you need to be literate. To to listen to a radio, you don't need to be literate. You can listen to a radio without being literate. So, newspaper has got this limitation that anybody who is not literate will not be able to read newspaper. But such is not the case with television, film, or radio. That obviously, if you have never gone to school or college, no problem, you can watch films, you will understand them thoroughly, because they are talking about you and me only. Now, this was about Pathé. Okay, up till here it was about Pathé. Let's talk about, or let me conclude about Pathé. Why Pathé is important? I'll be talking about Gaumont. Okay, the rise of Gaumont. The spelling is Gaumont. In English, it should be Gaumont, but it's Gaumont. So I'll be talking about Gaumont, but before that, let me conclude Pathé, why he is important. Pathé is important because he is the one who understood the business of cinema very well. And if I'm not mistaken, Pathé is a fully functional company even today also. So you really have to understand that the astute sense of business. When I talk about Pathé, it's more about economical understanding of filmmaking business. It is more business than aesthetics. Thank you very much.